Hello and welcome. We had no stream on Thursday for D&D and Hindsight because of illnesses, so instead I put together this little bonus stream where I'm just going to go over some 3.5 classes that are worth stealing stuff from. Uh, so, as our traditional intros, I'm Vincent, and I'm Vincent. So, without that out of the way, let's start with Archivist here. Basically, a cleric with a wizard-style spellbook, which is interesting enough. Uh, you would think this would be a more done concept, but it really isn't. Divine casters, the healer types, don't usually use spellbooks. They're more of a spontaneous caster, and depends on the system one way or another. But especially adapting this to like 5th edition would be kind of needed in of itself for not just that reason, but also the fact they can learn druid spells from scrolls is also kind of cool. It can expand the loot the DM can give you as well to uh, more desirable things like spell scrolls with spells you could have learned when you leveled up is kind of neat, but a secondary one. But ones you can't actually normally learn as your character are a lot more interesting as loot. Also in this class, and even more the reason why it was here, is Dark Knowledge, which basically weaponizes knowledge checks in the form of buffs against either those guys or that guy in particular, which is kind of a neat as hell idea. Depending on what system you're is how you would do it. I would probably get away from the skill check itself, but have it rank up with your specific like skill or whatever equivalent in your system, knowledge and whatever it uses, and just have it scale with either level or feats or whatnot, however the system works basically. And yeah, and moving on to the next thing. Ardent, or more specifically, mantles, which are basically minor class features that happen to come with spell lists. You build your own spell list with the class features you choose. This could be like you take feats, like you take combat feat, you get like evocation spells out of it, or you take a defensive feat, you get like abjuration spells out of it, or it could be from skills. You take like a seeing feat, you get divination spells out of it, or seeing feat, a seeing skill, and you get divination spells out of it, stuff like that. Just in general, being able to build your own spell list in relation to how you built your character, which would make your spells very much correspond with what your character actually does without pretty naturally. Depending on how you design it, you could also just give them the spells outright, but I'd probably go against that just to make it not feel like they should be taking skills they would otherwise not want in order to get spells in order to get those spells. Well, I guess that'd be the case anyways, but yeah. It also kind of restricts the actual amount of choices they have in combat rather than growing them as much if you have them take lesser amounts of spells from stuff, which can help prevent some analysis paralysis, which is a bane of characters with too many options, especially spellcasters. In any case, moving on to Martial here. Auras are common in games, and changing them is less so, but they sometimes have features for changing in the middle of combat. And this one is kind of a failed execution in the sense that there's about 2 auras ever worth taking, so this is really a 4-level class with 16 levels of filler, in case the DM absolutely forces you to stay in the class and for some reason you chose Martial. But nonetheless, the idea was kind of here to have a bunch of different like defensive auras that you could switch between. The problem is you can only do it on your turn rather than as a reaction out of turn, which makes it so much a better class if that's actually the case. The other issue here being they also didn't level gate anything, so you basically just take the best auras immediately, which also happened to scale with stat, making it so sticking around the class isn't worth doing, so you just leave after taking them. Those are things you probably want to fix one way or another, depending on how the system is built again. But yeah, just the idea of having a or using class that could switch them defensively on the fly is kind of neat, actually. Also, it being an aura using class, that's not really an action that you do on your turn so much as it is just a buff you give out to your party. So giving them something else to do with their actions would be pretty ideal. Like in the case of Martial, actually commanding people is not a terrible idea. Like, hey, you hit that guy type of things. Not unlike the Warlord, I believe it was, in 4th edition, or maybe other stuff entirely. In any case, Divine Mind, which is basically a blender of Martial, Paladin, and Ardent, and blender classes in general I kind of find neat. Even if this one is a complete total mess, and in some cases overcautious, like the auras can't even be switched as it can't even be switched as anything but a move act, or it takes you until level 14 to switch auras as a move action, and like 18 to switch as a swift action. That's way too long. It takes you to like level 7 to have a decent size for your auras in general as well. Like you literally start out with them only affecting stuff next to you. They just underpowered this class. It's also just a mess of features in general. But the idea there is actually pretty solid. If you take like 2 or 3 things from a bunch of different classes and put them together, you can actually come up with something interesting, and sometimes better than the whole of its parts. Not in this case, but sometimes better than the whole of its parts. In truth, this class is functional. It's just a mess. It's better at higher levels than it is at earlier ones as well, but that's a different matter entirely. And Totemist. So Soul Melds is basically a class feature that has magic items where how powerful that magic item is can change from round to round because you get to move that around, which is neat in its own right, and we've talked validly in other places. But more interesting with Totemist is the totem binds that let you just basically do the attacks of magical beasts. Like you could breathe fire or lightning, or you can make 2 bites and a gore attack in the same round and stuff like that. And what I find neat, although not really as much of a class feature here, is the ability to rebind the totem soul melds. In other words, to literally switch between which magical beast attacks you actually have, which would be a lot better if they didn't get like let's see, 3 per day at level 16. So yeah, not really a thing that the class does so much. It's more of an emergency button or something, but if that was more the on the fly thing your class could do, it would actually be kind of neat as well. And Scout, or more specifically, the skirmish mechanic, which is move 10 feet and get a bonus to damage and and to AC, and it alternates between the two and scales at like half the pace of sneak attack, which in the context of 35 sucks balls. But it works better in actually other systems where your archers don't want to stand around and make full round attacks, because moving 10 feet as an archer in 3.5 basically means you're giving out about you can't do a full round attack, so you're giving up about 800 or so attacks a round, something like that. The archers shoot a lot in 3.5. Similarly, if you aren't an archer, if you're a melee class, if you went the sneak attack route instead, you'd be doing double the amount of damage, and flanking is not hard. And occasionally you can do that by moving like 5 feet or even no feet, so you get all of your attacks instead of just 1 attack. So it just does not compare very well to even sneak attack. But again, in other systems, this is a much better idea, and I actually do like the idea of encouraging my players to move if I'm putting out a grid and going to all the effort to put terrain down, etc., etc. Actually, having a mechanic that encourages them to move around on that grid and actually take advantage of everything I've set up, and in general, just the ideas of a grid-based system and basically strategy RPG-esque combat system where moving around is kind of an important thing. Makes for an actual decent or makes for an interesting type of combat buff in systems that aren't 3.5. Let's see. And moving on next to Source Age, which is really just a placeholder for blade magic. So if you're designing a complex combat system for your RPG, remember that a lot of players who run martial classes want to do more than just roll d20s at things and do damage, no matter how effective that might be. There's something to be said for working with player creativity and improvising, but my imagination shouldn't be doing all the heavy lifting in order to make combat more entertaining, and the answer to that shouldn't be just run a caster. You don't have to go as far as these classes do with quasi-magic setup of the disciplines, as even the Battlemaster in 5th edition is great for giving a fighter combat options other than attack for damage or work with DM to do silly things that works for this situation, which you can still do, and if you have abilities that are built right, they might even lead to more moments like that rather than take away from them. And moving on to Warlock. Elder Spouse is very much a thing as unlimited cantrips that actually are worth your action and time in combat, unlike the 3.5 cantrips, which do basically nothing for damage, so the utility ones were the only ones worth taking. But more what I'm focusing, that's very much, actual damaging cantrips are very much a feature of 5th edition and other systems as well. But what we're more talking about here is invocations, which are unlimited use spells, with no fuss, no muss. You have the spell and you can use it as many times as you want. You have a very narrow bandwidth of spells, but you are an absolute master of your spells. I don't see that very often in many systems, actually. And as much as Warlock is known for its Eldritch Blast, it also has a lot of like Charm or single target CCs or whatnot spells that are just at will usable. they almost never do because Eldritch Blast eventually it becomes kind of an AoE crowd control at higher levels, but that's a different matter entirely. And kind of in the same veins, but different, is Dragonfire Adapt. Whereas it also has its own invocations, and some of them are kind of along the same lines. I'm more talking about the breath weapon mechanic here, which is literally its main form of doing damage, as in it doesn't really make weapon attacks or anything. It just either breathes a line or a cone. Literally, its attacks from round to round are AoE attacks. This is actually pretty engaging gameplay for someone who wants to actually mess around with shapes on a board. It has a unique style of combat that can be interesting from turn to turn. And then it actually has breath effects, which are... There's not enough of them. You don't get enough of them to be as interesting as they should be, but at least the idea was there. And so the higher level ones are good. It's just that they're more of a minor thing. And it's here more do the main feature here is generally AoE damage, but not always. And from there, let's finally move on to True Neighbor. Possibly the most interesting failure in gaming history. But the idea here is spells that use skill checks to cast with a growing DC every time you actually pull off the spell. That's a neat idea, if you don't fuck up the math. And man, did they fuck up the math. But yeah, word of advice, don't make your spells scale faster with the challenge rating of the monster you're targeting, or the player you're targeting for that matter, then you can actually grow your stats. But in general, I would rather just do flat DCs for everything, basically, based on how powerful the spell is, or some such thing like that. But yeah, the idea of something that just starts as reliable, but as you cast it more and more times in a day, it becomes more of a press your luck, and then maybe even grows impossible. I like that a lot better. Also, metamagic via increasing the DCs, which is how this class works, is actually not a bad idea for just spicing up lower level spells. Again, if they just had a flat DC, they'd work a hell of a lot better, since everything's DC is entirely based on what you're targeting. It does not work in the system at all, but the idea was there. Yeah. So, right. What do we learn here? Hopefully something. Hopefully you're inspired or entertained by my ramblings. In any event, thank you for watching, and remember, good artist copy, great art still is apparently a Picasso quote. Also, hindsight's 2020.